today I'm really pleased to have an amazing discussion going on now with Jamie Towey from Aging with Dignity. It's an organization that's in the U.S., but it has a very long, important history. And the reason I wanted to talk to Jamie was because they started something called an assisted suicide watch, and I thought that was very, very important, especially with what's going on in the U.S., but also the fact that this is an organization that has a very long history of being involved with issues around power of attorney documents for end of life care type decisions, as well as they've been involved with issues around seniors, all these very issues for a very long time. It was founded by Jamie's dad, Jim Towey, and they've been in existence since 1996. I just want to say a couple of amazing things about this organization. They have distributed, they have a power of attorney type document, and we know that these documents have different names in different states, right, based on the language that state legislation used. But they have distributed, since the founding of this 5 wishes type document, 43 million copies of this. This is amazing. That means a huge number of Americans have used the 5 wishes document in order to help determine what kind of care or what kind of support they would want as they get older and need someone else to help make decisions for them, etc. So I think I'm going to just move on to Jamie to talk a little bit about the history of Aging with Dignity, and then we can talk a little bit about the Assisted Suicide Watch and other important things they're doing.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm glad to be here, Alex. You guys are carrying a lion's share of what's going on up in Canada with the fight there. So, and here in the States, because I know you guys have the US group as well. So no, I love getting your emails every day, and I know you've got a group of devoted followers. So I'm honored to be here. It's like I'm coming up from the minors into the big leagues. So this is a big day. But yeah, we've at Aging with Dignity, I've only been here a year, but we've been, or at this point, a year and a half now, but we've been around for a long time, since 1996. As you mentioned, my dad founded it. So Jim Towey, he was Mother Teresa's friend and lawyer for the last 12 years of her life. And so he lived long story, and there's a book that you can read about it in, but when he lived in the Washington, D.C. area, he lived in her AIDS home here in Washington, D.C., in the Gift of Peace. So that was the home for the dying. And it was, back in the late 80s, there was just a deluge of patients coming in off the streets because this was a time in our country where there was a lot of confusion about that virus, and the victims of it were being treated horrendously by the healthcare system. So Mother was taking them in off the streets. They'd be dying within a matter of days, sometimes longer. And his view of what dying ought to look like was really profoundly shaped by his time working there. He also worked at her home for the dying in Calcutta, where people have complaints about the medical industry in the West. You gotta spend some time in Calcutta a little bit. But he that's what kind of gave him this desire to look at death not just through this hyper medicalized lens that we often do in the West, but like through the lens of, this is a personal experience, this is a spiritual experience, this is something that is not just for the person, it's for their family, it's for their friends, and it's for the community. He later headed up Health and Human Services in Florida under Governor Lawton Chiles, and when he left that job, that's when he started Aging with Dignity. And so we were first called the Commission on Aging with Dignity because the general goal was pretty wide. It was just, how can we help preserve dignity at the end of life? What would that even mean? And right out of the gate, it was 1996. And so in 97, Oregon's law passed, and the Supreme Court cases that determined that you do not have a constitutional right to assisted suicide were both decided in that range as well. And so we were very vocal on that front, but most of what our organization has done since then, really up until the launch of Assisted Suicide Watch, the primary focus has been that document, that power of attorney you were talking about, called 5 wishes. So yeah, in the States it'd be called an advanced directive, and we've just been amazed at how much traction that's gotten and how many lives it's been able to touch. So that's kind of the nutshell view of where we came from. And yeah, well, I'm in the DC area, so I'm in the Falls Church office, and we've got an office down in Tallahassee, Florida, a long way from Canada, where the Canadian border.
Very good. Well, we have lots of supporters throughout the U.S. too, so it's important that we share this. And it's funny that we have this conversation today, because I just got an email from one of my American supporters, because we always promote our power of attorney document, and we do have American documents that are state oriented. So I'm assuming that the 5 wishes does have some different sort of focuses depending on what state you're from,
Yeah.
because as you and I know that this is state legislation that creates these how would you say, rules around advanced directives, power of attorneys.
Yeah, no, they are. Five Wishes is legally valid in all 50 states, and that's kind of one of the things that made it has been a difference maker for us. We started as a Florida document, so a lot of the language that's in the Five Wishes document initially was drafted given the Floridian statutes, and then so that was in 1997, and then in 1998 we went national. The idea being, I mean, you touch on a good point that all these states have these, and look, I'm obviously partial to Five Wishes. I would encourage folks of all kinds to work on, planning for the end of life, whether it's our document or yours. There are plenty of out there. When this started, the perspective was, how do we make this a patient-focused document?
Right.
How do we
Yeah.
make this something that's going to
Yeah.
help the patient, that the patient knows is for them? And a lot of the state documents, number one, I mean, if you've seen them, I mean, it's just legalese, boilerplate, tough. I mean, I've got a college degree. It's hard for me to read them. Let alone, and if you're someone that hasn't honed one's reading skills, critical reading in a while, or if you're elderly, you're struggling with dementia, you're in severe pain, they're tough. And number two, sometimes you'll see in these a bias towards the state or towards the healthcare system. One thing we've prided ourselves on is that we have no money from the government, no money from healthcare organizations. We're on the side of the patient. So Five Wishes, which I made sure I had a copy for this, but it's written at the sixth grade reading level. It's in 33 languages. It's very open. It has spaces where you, the patient, can specify things. And it's got five wishes. I mean, the first one is healthcare power of attorney. So for those who don't know, that's who makes decisions for you when you can't make them for yourself for any reason. And then I should say healthcare decisions for you. And then two is the living will component is what that's often called, which is basically you're putting in your own words. Again, something that differentiates us from other documents out there. You're putting in your words what kind of treatment you want, what to do in cases of life support, and things of that nature. And so, wish two, which is where that comes into play. It's always had the line, I want nothing done or omitted with the intention of taking my life. So it's been a protecting factor on that front. And then I would say another thing that really has allowed this to be successful is wishes 3 through 5, which talk more about how do you want to be cared for? How do you want to be seen as a
Right.
person?
Yes.
So, yeah, but it
No,
tracks.
that's very important. Now, for instance, I know this wasn't supposed to maybe get into this discussion, but
Yeah.
we started our document first in Canada because most of the documents that lawyers would use, for instance, they were from a template that came from, let's say it was Ontario. The Ontario lawyers would have a template that they would all have access to, and they could adjust it. That's correct. But the language of that, what I would call the basic document, I found to be very dangerous because how it basically urged that you would have no further treatment, only comfort care. But of course, these things weren't properly defined. And this was a very big concern, and it would be then interpreted then by a physician in whatever situation, because no further treatment, only comfort care. Well, I know in most places in Canada that would also mean no food and fluids, because
Right.
food and fluids are defined as treatment, and that would be a big problem. So we specifically defined our document in such a way that the person who you've appointed would make those kind of decisions, and we were quite clear that you wanted food and fluid unless you were actually dying. I mean, clearly dying, etc. So we
Right.
did
And I
have a clear,
will,
yeah,
I would just say too, I mean, for y'all, there's the extra layer of, we'll talk at some point, I'm sure, on this call about the situation in the US. But at the end of the day, there still is at least theoretically, the idea is it's always the patient deciding for him or herself to end their
right,
life. In Canada with euthanasia, that's a very different landscape as well. So it's
yeah.
good to have those protectors.
So you guys had the five wishes, and this has been very successful. 43 million copies have been distributed. 1.2 million alone, I guess, last year.
Mm-hmm.
That's significant, and this is something that's available to people everywhere in the U.S. And as you said, 33 languages. That's very impressive. And I want to thank you for doing that in so many languages, because obviously speaking, I would assume that in most type of documents, they have a limited language, accessibility type thing.
Sure. Sure.
Now, you also, it says you guys offer video counseling. What kind of counseling are you guys involved in then?
Yeah, the video counseling I will say is that's more writ large. It's not specialized. We have a series of videos on YouTube talking through things like grief and things like that.
Right.
That's more what that refers to. We do a lot of trainings as well in terms of the more like specified kind of thing. In other words, for clinicians to facilitate conversations about advanced care planning, or just for people in a hospice setting, maybe not a physician, but someone who works in palliative care or who works at an assisted living facility. So we've trained, I think the number's 15,000 professionals. And so there's, I think it's more than that. Anyway, get my numbers mixed up, but
Well, it
training
said
is a huge
online
part
around
of it.
15,000. That's correct. That's what
Yeah.
it said. Yeah, yeah.
So there you go.
That's an amazing number. That's very important. And so this is something. So you're providing training through your
Correct.
videos that of things you've put together with the specific
The
information
trainings,
for that
yeah, the
purposes. Yeah.
trainings are hands-on, and then the
Yep.
videos are just for the general public. So yeah, the training will facilitate.
Excellent. That's very good. So the assisted suicide watch is something that was announced well, I think it's quite a few months ago. I saw an
Yeah.
article about it at the turn of the year, and I thought that was very important. And I think the timing is incredibly important, especially with the number of states that in this year are really seems like really pushing hard to
Yeah.
legalize assisted suicide. Now, my experience has been we've been quite successful over the last few years in preventing the legalization of assisted suicide. So there have been no new state that had legalized assisted suicide since New Mexico in the year
Yeah.
2020. That law came into place in 2021. And now part of that could be because of COVID sort of made it more difficult for the assisted suicide lobby. But I know last year and the year before that, so 2024 and 2023, Compassionate Choices, for instance, had put in millions of dollars into several key states in lobbying, et cetera, to legalize, and they failed to do so, which was a great victory for those people who are opposed basically to killing people, who are in favor of caring for people and not killing them. And so your coming involved, I think, is very important, especially in this year. And I want you to comment how the decision making around that happened.
Sure. Yeah. So if you go back to our roots, our roots are in advocacy. Our roots are in acknowledging that the way to care for patients is to care for them, right? That's always been our MO. And Five Wishes is what was at the forefront of a lot of what we did for a long time. That's how we saw ourselves contributing to people preserving their dignity at the end of life. If you look back in the late 90s, the state of advanced care planning in the US was very poor. And so
Right.
we're very, grateful and humbled by the work we've done to date. But in the last couple years, I just think and you've been at the vanguard of this, and thank you for all your work, but over the last few years, it's just impossible to step back and ignore the fact that this has gone from being a fringe issue to a mainstream one. And not only that, you look, Canada in 2015 and the progress is the right word, but the speed at which things have happened there, I think have opened a lot of eyes. And so we've always worked on this issue, but never in a formalized, specific capacity. And so eventually the board reached a decision of, look, we need to become more vocal on this. We need to go back to our roots and engage with this, because this is going to pass us by. You can't just kind of like, oh, well, we'll live the model life of here's what dignity looks like. At some point, if there's a fire, you got to put it out. So that was the process, the thought process. Our board released a statement and at the end of last year that, against physician-assisted suicide legalization in the United States. And so Assisted Suicide Watch, it's a project that's looking to just shine a light on this issue. We
Right.
really believe that sunlight's a disinfectant with this. I think most people, this is, I like to say it's the wrong answer to real problems. People see suffering at the end of life, and they see a healthcare system that doesn't treat the person, it treats the symptoms. And I could go on and on. And so people say, well, why don't we, what isn't this compassionate? And so I think shining sunlight on the fact of what this really is and what the implications are, that'll go a long way. And so I think in the United States, there's some great team. You're doing great work. Groups like PRAF, Not Dead Yet. There's so many groups that have been involved in this. We're not looking to supplant. We're looking here to join, lock arms with, and this is such a diverse coalition. It's and I really do believe that the more the public is made aware of this stuff, the quicker we'll get to getting this stuff tamped down.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that the more information people hear, the more they become questioning of this being a good idea. So I just give people a quick example that, in euthanasia, I should first say the difference between euthanasia and assisted
Yeah.
suicide, because in Canada we have euthanasia that they call MAID, which is a made in Canada term to make you feel better about killing people. But euthanasia is actually homicide. So Canada created an exception in our criminal code to homicide to allow for euthanasia. And what it does is it allows the doctor or nurse practitioner to lethally inject you. So you need two of them to agree to it, to go ahead and do it. It gives them legal right to do so. Whereas assisted suicide is almost identical, but the difference is the doctor, in some states now, nurse practitioners and physician assistants, etc., because now they're expanding these laws, right, to allow more people to do it. They would then prescribe that lethal poison rather than inject you, but you would have to take it yourself. So the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide is one is that the doctor or nurse practitioner are directly doing the act, and the other one is that they're prescribing the same lethal drugs with the same intention and the same outcome, but they're not actually physically doing the act. And that's your difference. Intention's the same, outcome's the same. But anyway, with our work, we have a helpline. So I'm just going to reinforce what
Yeah.
you're saying. So we get calls from people, and we've been dealing with quite a few people who have been either approved for euthanasia or were seeking it. And when you speak to them, you would think that it's primarily about someone who is suffering, because that's how it's sold to us, that they're suffering, that they're in unremittent pain. They absolutely are feeling that they have to escape this suffering. And there are some people who do suffer greatly. I'm not going to say they don't, but we've almost completely dealt with people who are saying, I have maybe fear of it, or I feel like a burden, etc. But they're almost always saying to us, when I'm asking them, when I'm actually talking with them after they've come to trust you and they've called, so they're interested in our opinion because someone's told me you should call and see if there's an alternative to your situation. They almost always say, but I'm alone. I'm lonely. I have nobody in my life. And so they're saying I have no reason to live, is what they're actually saying to us. They're not saying I'm suffering so greatly. I had a call, just so you know, I had a call from a guy in British Columbia, and he had multiple health issues. So the first question would be, you know, why is this not being properly dealt with? But that's a whole healthcare question. You put that aside. But I spent a lot of time listening to him and having him express what he was going through and everything. You would think in his situation, when I actually asked him, but why would you actually want euthanasia? Because this is what it is, that he might say, but Alex, I'm suffering. His response was, Alex, I have nobody else in my life. I have nobody in my life. That was his response. So, even in the case where you could say, oh, this person's got multiple health problems, how could you deny this to him? He wasn't saying he wanted it for that. He was saying, I have nobody else in my life. I, I'm, I feel I have no reason to live, is what he's saying. That's a totally different question. It's a totally different question than the assisted suicide lobby's thing about we're protecting people from suffering.
No, it is. And unfortunately, it's a problem that's becoming more widespread. And it's why our focus on this assisted suicide watch is not an end, in and of itself. Assisted suicide watch is meant to show why this is a false solution to what we're facing, but
Yep.
then you cannot stop there. And what I worry about is that people will kind of, they'll just, oh, don't do that. That's bad. Now move on, go back to your lonely life without friendship. And no, I mean, now more than ever, and I know it's an abuse. COVID made the whole now more than ever thing terrible. But truly, with the baby boomers age wave coming, and with the advent of all of this autonomous technology, things like artificial intelligence and robotics, the temptation is going to continue to be to push people to the margins, make
Right.
the, isolate. Zuckerberg the other day just said the reason you should use Meta glasses are because we have the capacity for about 15 friends, and studies show the average person has about 3. So Meta will give you your AI friends, right? Like that's the solution for a lot of people. Is like, oh, Japan, like give them the robot dolphins and things like that. So all's to say that the underlying issues of these aren't going away, even if you
That's
get
exactly
all
it.
of these laws off the books. And so I think that's a further challenge to people that claim to be on the side of who are on the side of caring for the patients to continue to engage and to try to rally more people to care for the actual person behind the illness. Because you're right, it just this at the end of the day, it's autonomy, it's old life activities, it's loneliness. That's what the data out of Canada and Oregon shows, right? So I don't
Absolutely.
think they're not talking points from you and me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's important that we provide more information and we get it out there, because the thing of it is people become sort of almost politically convinced of something. And I've seen this in a lot of states where the debate goes on. Just for an example, in the recent, and I know this is not again US or Canada, but it's the most recent debate, major debate on assisted suicide that just has been happening in Scotland.
Oh,
The
sure.
one, yeah, the one member of the Scottish legislature said, well, I think that the times are changing. I want to be with the times. And it's like, so you think it's okay now to kill people because the culture is shifting and it's saying that maybe that's what other places are doing now. So this is now the times are changing. Well, think about what the issue actually means. And this
Yeah.
is the problem, that this has been divorced from the concept, what it actually means, and I think that's essential. Like, for instance, recently Delaware passed their assisted suicide bill, and it actually really affected me in the base of my gut. And you'd say, I must have ate something bad. No, 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 nothing to do with that. It affected me in the base of my gut because I knew exactly what they had passed. They were saying, and it was a close vote, as you remember, but they were saying, it's okay now. Once it's signed by the governor, it'll be okay now for doctors to be involved with killing their patients.
Yeah, there's a class of citizens where, ending your own life with your own hand, that's okay. In the midst of all of these 988 suicide prevention resources that we're pouring money into,
That's right.
um, there's a class of citizens where it's okay. But I mean, just to your point on, I want to be with the times, right? I think that speaks to the advocacy efforts that have been going on for 30 years from large groups like Compassion Choices and Death with Dignity and Final Exit and all these groups. I mean, they've normalized this discussion. Hollywood has done a great one. And so I think, again, we're getting, when we launched Assisted Suicide Watch, one of those organizations, I won't name who, they put out an email saying this new group has been launched, Aging with Dignity. Your right to die is under threat. And they said something like the opposition it was something like the opposition is crafty and well funded.
Yeah, well,
We're getting outspent like 30-1 on this, right? So again, I think it's a clarion call for people when you hear these debates come up. We're not outspent. I mean, we're getting crushed on spending. Compassion Choices, what, 30 million last year, 28 or something like that. So
it's amazing how much. Yeah.
yeah, so there's a long way to go in terms of shifting that cultural mindset from just riding with the
So
times.
Jamie, just as you probably realized, they were using that as a fundraising email
Oh yeah,
that
I know.
yeah,
Yeah,
you guys
I know. I
launched, and
gave money to them. It worked. They tricked me. So
well, not for you in general, but for
no,
their
I know.
donors, so they
Yep.
can see that another organization is out there. Yeah,
Yep.
so then they'll make all these comments. In my own country, it's been very difficult, but I look at the U.S. and a lot of the data people just don't realize. They're just not aware. They say, "Oh, these laws are controlled." Now, first of all, it doesn't matter how well you try and write a law. It is about killing people, and really, essentially, I'm opposed to killing people, and that's the bottom line.
Sure.
I
Sure.
believe in caring for people. That's the fundamental thing. And when society's not caring for its people, that's a tragedy. But for instance, people don't realize that in the state of Oregon, in California and Washington State, where they've legalized assisted suicide, that there's a large number of people who every year receive the lethal drugs, and the state has no idea what happened to them. They don't know that they
Yep.
don't know the reality that there is no real oversight of these laws. They just don't realize it. They don't realize that these laws are designed to protect the doctors. They're not there to protect the person who is saying they want to die. And they're being told that this is all about their freedom and their choice and their autonomy. And that's a lie. It's a lie. It's about the doctors having the right to cause your death. That's how the laws are written. That's exactly what it's about. Whether they want to use that talking point or not, that's what it's about. That's how it
Yeah,
works.
we're working on a piece right now that walks through exactly that. Here's the arguments that they give for it. Here's how the actual legislation ends up getting written. And then what are the implications of that? Because it's true. I mean, the conscience protection laws for doctors are, I mean, it
That's right.
runs everything. The leeway that it gives doctors in terms of prescribing this stuff is extraordinary. Um, and unused prescriptions as well. No, you're spot on.
Well, Wesley Smith just wrote an article that was published just the other day, yesterday, I believe, about the lies of the
Saw that in the
assisted
New York bill.
suicide bill in New York. Yeah,
Yeah, I saw
absolutely.
that.
Now I've just timed myself by saying the bill just came out. That doesn't matter. But you know exactly, he just points out all these lies within the bill itself. And the reason, and the other thing about these situation, and I know that it's probably something that you'll also cover in the future, is the fact that the language that they use, they say that these bills are very protective, etc. And of course they're not, because the language they use they never define. You're
No, of
looking
course,
through it,
yeah.
and they're using this terminology. So they want assisted suicide to be seen as medical treatment. It's not
Right,
treatment.
right,
There's no treatment about it.
right.
These are the kind of thing, and they don't want to define. They'll say a 6-month prognosis, but they don't want to tell you what that actually means. And even then, the only reason they're putting in a 6-month prognosis sort of thing into the bill is not because it's actually meant for terminally ill people, because that's almost impossible to determine a 6-month prognosis per se. It's because they want to be able to say, well, we have a tight bill and it's only for terminally ill people. But in fact, the truth of it is if you're a insulin dependent diabetic, you now qualify. That is how the law works. So these are the kind of things. And if you are determined to have a really difficult time with your eating disorder, you now qualify. These are the kind of things that people don't understand. So,
And I also think that one thing, for anyone that's watching, and I know you have a very engaged audience, and so I think they do know this, but for the broader public too to understand, it always starts narrow. It always starts
that's
narrow. I
right.
mean, again, we would all argue that it shouldn't exist in the first place. But when they're pushing this forward, because it always comes back to, yeah, but this is about pain, and it's for people that are like they always frame it as, these individuals are going to die like tomorrow, and this is just their way of ending it on their own terms, and
Right.
that sometimes matches reality. And I don't want to sell people short on some of the deeply traumatic experiences they've had at the end of life. That's always how it's sold. But I think what people need to understand is it never, ever stops there. Not in some kind of like the slippery slope is a term that's used, and it's always understood as like this passive thing, like, oh, I'm on the slope and I'm sliding and like I can't help it. It's not how this works. They pass that, they
No.
get the foot in the door, and then they work like hell to get rid of those exact guardrails that they've put in place, right? Safeguards become barriers to access. And so, I mean,
Right.
every single state that's passed this stuff, they reduce the waiting period, right? Many have redefined a doctor to become a physician's assistant, nurse practitioner, things of that
Yep.
nature. You can now get it by mail. You can, in Vermont, you can get doctor shopping, the mental health one, because it's always like, oh, well, isn't this just a workaround for people that are suicidal? Not only has Oregon for the entirety, well, I shouldn't say for the entirety. Initially, they were pretty good about it for the first few years, but certainly for the 2000s, Oregon has utterly ignored its psychiatric referrals component of their bill. And now they're kind of tired of pretending, and they're not even worried about it being a talking point. They're actually right now in the state legislature trying to get rid of the need for psychiatric referrals. So it never stops, not in some passive way, but in a very active, intentional way about getting this stuff through. Lastly, I would say too, is through court cases. Again, Compassion and Choices, they're the poster child for this, but there are a lot of groups out there. They spend millions of dollars on sourcing these court cases around the country that put more legal challenges out there. And so the expansion of these laws is not an accident, and it's not grassroots. It comes from the top down. But you first got to get in. You got to get your
Right.
foot in the door
That's right.
before you make any of this happen. And I think, again, with Assisted Suicide Watch, just bringing that to light, making that just,
That's
something that
correct.
comes out of the shadows is what we're trying to focus on.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, Amy Powlin, who's the sponsor of the New York assisted
Yeah,
suicide bill, even said herself that we have to get the bill passed first. We can
yeah,
always,
yeah,
we can
yeah,
expand it later, but we have to get it passed first. And
yeah.
that's what they do. And then, and if you look at this, in all the states where they've removed the residency requirement, it's the same compassionate choices that lobbied to get the law passed, who then later takes the state to court to remove the residency
Right. No,
requirement from the law.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
so they
In New
turn from
Jersey, it
friend to
just
foe.
happened. Vermont, that's how it happened, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a playbook. Like it's the playbook for the proposition, and so that's again, I think for people to pretend this is this groundswell of support, no. I mean, it's every single state where this is passed. Even the Montana court case was orchestrated. I mean, all of this stuff has been
yep, that's right.
orchestrated from from outside interest groups.
Very good. So, Jamie, do you have anything else that you want to talk about? Because, I think that people working with Aging with Dignity is a worthwhile thing to do. And obviously, the Five Wishes document, it's been around a long time. It's tried and true. And we have a document, but nonetheless, I see yours as being tried and true, worthy of people's, support. So, you have anything else to say at this point about assisted suicide, the hopes for the Suicide Watch?
Well, as it relates to y'all, look, we haven't tested the legality in Canada yet, so we're U.S. based, so we no stepping on toes there. I think.
Oh, I was referring to the U.S. in general, but that's
Oh,
fine.
well, there you go.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
then
yeah,
we
yeah.
can work in consort. No, I mean, look, if people are interested in learning more about what we do, they can go to our website, agingwithdignity.org or assistedsuicidewatch.org, and then Five Wishes is at fivewishes.org. Those are all very complicated names to remember. Pretty intuitive. So, no, I mean, I don't need to. We work with all sorts of organizations.
Yep.
And we're a 501c3. So for Americans, that means we're education based. We're not doing any active lobbying or things like that. And so that limits a little bit of what we do, but we work with all sorts of organizations, not just with advanced care planning, but just with bringing awareness to these issues anyway. So no, I mean, the goal is that we link arms with great organizations like yours, Alex, and a lot of the other ones out there. And again, get the message out, shine light on this, and ultimately elevate the conversation between this binary of pain and poison that gets pitched so frequently from the proposition on this issue. We want to bring it back to the patients. How can we love them and care for them? I guess I'd just close with Dad, when he was he knew Mother Teresa well, and he has a book called To Love and Be Loved, which is a personal portrait of Mother Teresa, where he talks about that relationship.
Yep.
And in his time with Mother, he really took to heart her words that became the title of that book, that each of us has a desire, our purpose is to love and to be loved. And so we're not a faith-based organization. She was a humanitarian for folks of all kinds. But I think that's a message that anyone of any faith, any background, any belief can take, which is that for these patients that are suffering, that are lonely, the solution is not to give them an exit ramp out. The solution is to care for them, to confront
Yep.
the difficult sufferings that they have, and to walk with them in that pain.
Thank you, Jamie. That's a fabulous way to end this conversation. And
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
you're welcome. This is great having you. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, y'all.